Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this morning's meeting of the Housing and Communities Committee. As members will be aware, Perth Kinross Council is currently undergoing the audit of best value conducted by Audit Scotland, and I'm pleased to welcome one of the best value auditors, Lindsay Davis of Audit Scotland, who will be observing today's meeting. So good morning to you all and welcome to the meeting today. Item 1 on our agenda, can I ask if there are any substitutions or apologies?
Councillor Brock substituting for Councillor Bailey.
Thank you for that.
And Councillor McCall substituting for Councillor Hearn.
Thank you very much for that. Are there any declarations of interest from elected members with regard to any items on today's agenda? No, that's great, thank you. Item 3 is the minute of the meeting of this committee of 23rd of January. Can we approve the minute for me to sign? Can we agree that? Thank you. Okay, good. Can we, as per our general custom and practice, agree to vary the order of business to take the private items P1 and P2, being the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service operational update and the Police Scotland operational update for Perth and Kinross, and we will then resume in public session shortly thereafter. I've been advised by the police that they don't have any items to raise in the private section, but if any members have any questions they want to raise during that time, we can do that, and that the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service update will be very brief as well. So I would hope that with a very short private session we'll be able to reconvene in public, certainly by 10:15 or thereabouts, maybe even sooner. But if we could clear the chamber for the private session, please. Gordon, can I ask you to introduce the quarterly report?
Thank you very much, Convener. Just so you don't hear me talk continually this time myself, I'll give an overview and then I'll ask Billy to give some of the details to allow you to get a full understanding of the paper. So if I could ask members to turn to page 18 of the report, which is page 6 of the Fire Service report. That is the page of the performance summary. Here we have our 12 sort of key headline indicators, and in the main, it's a very positive picture. We have 7 that are aiming to be below target. They are the accidental dwelling fires, which continues to look as if it's going to be below target. We have the accidental dwelling fires, non-fatal casualties, and by the end of Q3, this is the most positive figure we've had for a number of years. Moving into our non-domestic fires, Billy will give you some more details on that, but we've got we've had a significant spike at Perth Prison, so that's brought some numbers up higher than we'd like. Our road traffic collisions, again, they are below and look to be on target. What I would remind members is that we only record the road traffic collisions the fire and rescue attend, and not the whole picture that is out there at the time. But really the ones where we are probably are going to be above target, we have the accidental dwelling fatal casualties that we spoke about at our last meeting. We have the fatal RTC and non-fatal RTC casualties, and then we have the deliberate secondary fires. And the only other element we've got that's going to be slightly above target is our unwanted fire alarm targets. And I'll ask Billy to give a bit more detail on some and all of these, please. Billy.
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. I'll just go over some highlights around some of the stats that we've reported in Q3. Accidental dwelling fires, for example, are continuing to be a long-term decrease, which is really good. Tragically, we had the one fatality because we always try to do a zero count on fatalities. The non-fatal casualties, i.e. people that are injured in fires, it looks like this year is going to be the lowest ever for the last 5 years, which is really good. And that's probably due to all the multi-agency work we do around unintentional harm in the home. Moving on to non-domestic fires, there's a slight, although overall the numbers are generally quite low in this area, We have had quite a spike in incidents at Perth Prison. We're working hard with the obviously prison staff and police to reduce those. And moving on to road traffic collisions. This year looks like it'll be one of the lowest years of road traffic collisions we've had in the last 5 years. However, the number of casualties and fatalities still seem to be on the increase. But you've also got to bear in mind that we agreed as a committee that we would maintain the targets this year that we had last year, because last year we had quite a spike in the number of incidents, so technically the target incident number could have increased, but we agreed as a committee to keep those targets the same as last year. So although the incidents of RTCs look like they're going to be really low this year, the number of casualties and fatalities will obviously go above the target that we set. Moving on to unwanted fire alarm signals, again, although it's relatively going to be the same as it is every year in and around the numbers, the number difference isn't great. However, we're doing a tremendous amount of work locally with partners, including the council, to try and reduce those, and hopefully over the next few months, probably a couple of years, those numbers will start to reduce significantly. However, at this point, they're staying in and around the same numbers. And just moving on to deliberate fires, particularly secondary fire, there's been a bit of a spike in that in Q3. Again, that seems to be a seasonal thing around the October month. However, we are working with our colleagues, particularly the police, to reduce those. Those particularly secondary fires seem to be centred around Perth City, and it'll just be the areas that we're aware of are normal, coming around from Craigie up the Tay into North Muirton area, and we're obviously dealing with that with our police colleagues and partner agencies quite regularly just now. The only thing I would take you to is page 31 and 33, where we've actually just identified some community safety events we do. We obviously do quite a lot of work partnership-wise. I've just highlighted some areas there and events we do around CPR training. We've had a visit to Crieff there about antisocial behaviour and unwanted fires or deliberate fires, which has helped reduce those because they went from obviously having a number of incidents down to 0. The anti-Nolan partnership I've mentioned there. Our annual event, A Safe Drive, Stay Alive, has obviously went down really well, and the feedback's been very positive for a very hard-hitting event. An event in Pitlochry and some kids coming to the local station around some of their emergency service badges. And moving on to page 33 with some incidents. I've highlighted there a fire at Gleneagles. And the reason I've probably highlighted that because it could have been a significant fire. However, with the good work and the good management of Gleneagles Hotel, that was actually reduced significantly when we arrived. Obviously, we dealt with the fire, but because of their very quick actions and how positive they were, that was reduced significantly. So a good thanks to Gleneagles. Also, I've highlighted there training at Blair Athol Castle, which is generally an annual event, which is around obviously protecting that historic and high value premises. And it's really an incident there about doing training if there was a fire here, and it's all about the salvage plan generally. So it's just to highlight that has been ongoing. And really that's all I've got to say about the report, unless you've got any questions you want to ask.
Thank you very much for that, Billy. Got Councillor Drysdale, then Councillor Brock, then Councillor Illingworth. Eric.
Thank you, Convener. I just wanted to probe a bit more with regard to the problem that seems to be occurring at Perth Prison, and to understand why this is happening. Is this are the number of fires that are there? It's difficult to just get from the paper as a whole whether these are deliberate or accidental. I'm assuming they might be deliberate, but I might be wrong. Can you just give a bit more detail on what's happening there?
Of the fires at the prison, 6 were deliberate and 1 was accidental. We are engaging, as Billy said, with the staff for identifying how we can best support them. And there's a number of elements that the staff themselves are able to assist us with. But some of these, their abilities are limited to what they can do with the structures they've got in place. What we do have is a very resilient and very well-organised response, which enables us to minimise any damage from these fires.
follow up, if I may. Just to clarify, are these the deliberate fires anyway? Are these taking place in the cell blocks, and what are the measures that are in place in regard to evacuations, etc.?
The fires are all in cells themselves. They're in the individual cell blocks. The evacuation process, are you up to speed on that one?
What I can add there is generally been centred around a small number of individuals who have got obviously ongoing issues and obviously raising fires as part of that. Ourselves have been working with obviously police and prison staff to minimise that and hopefully in the longer term that will be resolved. So this quarter looks like very well, so we haven't had many incidents here this quarter, so hopefully we've resolved a lot of these issues.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brock.
Convener, it's really just for clarification, because the front cover is it's the local fire and rescue plan for Perth Kinross 2017. Is that because it's a 17 to 20 plan, or should it be? It's just for clarification more than anything.
It's an ongoing plan. What we will be doing is, as a National Fire and Rescue Service, we are reviewing our strategic plan, I think in Q3, Q4, so I'll continue a mid-term review, but this is designed as a 3-year plan to take us forward.
Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you, Convener. To go back to the performance summary on page 18, a quick clarification, it totals up non-fatal casualties. Now, is a casualty in this state something like a paper cut? Would that be recorded, or is it just serious injuries that get recorded?
We get a number. The way the casualties are broken down, they're broken down into 4 levels. And what we do is we record all casualties where we have given first aid to and anything else. So it could be anything from the most severe person that needs significant hospitalisation with severe injuries, right down to any basic first aid that we give at the time. So depends on the need, and it's the way we give our first aid. So if there is a first aid requirement, we will record them as a casualty. So it may be something as insignificant and low, maybe not as a paper cut, but something very low level, or it could be something right up to sort of the most severe level of injuries.
Sorry about that. Councillor Shires.
Thank you.
Certainly, it is something that, as with all elements, with all funding, is continually challenging. However, the projection going forward is there is sufficient funding to keep it suitably resourced in the short term, and we'll continue to make sure that it's brought in through the appropriate budgets. So partners remain committed to it. That's all partners, and it looks as if there is suitable funding in place.
Just ask the Director to expand on that.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to, to confirm that we are not planning and have not planned to take any savings, because of the value that the Safe Drive Stay Alive campaign has for young people.
Councillor McEwen.
Thank you. A couple of questions. Obviously, nationally and locally, we have issues around employing fire service personnel, both retained and permanent staff. And obviously at this committee we've also heard regarding the expanded role in the fire service now, how much more of your work is working with the police and other agencies. Do you think this extended role will help in your recruitment going forward?
Certainly, looking at the whole time element, the permanent firefighters, we have a recruitment campaign that is about to be launched, and we in the main do not have any recruitment issues. We tend to have far more people wanting to work for us than we have spaces. So it's a very healthy picture there. Where we do have some challenges, and this is nationally, is with our retained and volunteer staff. The model that is designed allows us to people who work and live in their communities to respond within those communities. But the model of the modern life has changed very much, where people work outside their local communities, travel to significant distances to employment, which then makes it more challenging for us to get the appropriate coverage 24/7, just because of the employment changes in today's modern environment. So it's important for us as a fire and rescue service to identify that. We've got a project team working to see how we can best address and change that. But locally, I'm very keen to engage with employers just to make sure we get that release, as I mentioned earlier on, and that should allow us then to ensure that we've got the appropriate number of staff available and able to join the retained and volunteer agencies.
Thank you. The other question I have is, Councillor Shires mentioned the Safe Drive, Stay Alive efforts that you've done, which again is a good example of the sort of multi-agency work that you're doing. The last one that you did was down in the North Campus. What are the plans for actually trying to get this round Perth Kinross? We're a very large geographical council area.
My understanding is they are looking to keep it at a single location and bring people to the show, because it's far easier to run it that way, just the logistics of those elements. But I'll take your comments back to the organisational team just to see if there are any other options we could review and look at.
Because road safety and the efforts that you have with the police towards road safety are ultimately extremely important to the people of Perth and Kinross. And obviously, there's not just this event, but other things that you can do to improve the circumstances around speeding and poor driving and all the other things that we hear about just about every week.
Yeah, thanks for that. We are looking at that. It's how we deliver that. As I'm sure you're aware, delivering Safe Drive, Stay Alive to that number of pupils is quite logistically challenging. So to take it out across Perth and Kinross or the wider Tayside area would be into certain communities is difficult. However, we are looking at almost what you would call a mini Safe Drive, Stay Alive. We're also looking to develop VAR or virtual reality headsets. So we're looking at developing that locally just now. So hopefully that will become part of that solution.
Thank you for that. Councillor McCall, did you have a question? No? Okay. I had a couple of questions. Firstly, I wanted to say thank you very much for the additional information regarding unwanted fire alarm signals, which I think this committee had asked for previously, so it was really useful to get the breakdown by property type and also to see the leaflets that you hand out to premises where there have been UFAS. The leaflet says that there were something like 55,000 unwanted fire alarm signals across Scotland, accounting for 57% of calls to the fire service. How do we compare as an area with the rest of Scotland in terms of the proportion of UFAS that we encounter here? Do you know?
Looking at page 19 of the report, it breaks it down into false alarms, and that's the total number of false alarms for Perth and Kinross. Perth and Kinross is not an area where there is a significant number of UFAS. There are some small premises where we would be able to engage, can target and make a difference. A lot of the UFAS calls that come through are sort of single elements and single issues. That's why the appendix we've shown in page 3 is probably one of the more important ones for Perth and Kinross. What we have is a structured response where we've a phased element, and for every unwanted fire alarm signal we attend, our attending crews will do some initial engagement. When the basic thresholds are 5 in a 3-month period, 10 in a 6-month period, and 20 in a 9-month period, they trigger different responses. These are nationally agreed responses through the area. So what we're doing is a lot of work throughout the Tayside area, including PCAD, about how we can start targeting the premises that breach those thresholds and also the ones slightly below those thresholds, which will allow us to continue to to make basic continual improvements. So what we do have in Perth and Kinross is a few premises that we can work with, but in the main, it's all very small number of premises. So no major concerns, but we do have the ability to make continual improvement.
Thanks very much for that, Gordon. And the other question was on a similar line. The report highlights the numbers of accidental dwelling fires. I think at 31, it says that in 26 of those properties there was a smoke detector fitted, and I think in 17 of them it sounded the alarm and helped a more rapid response and increased safety for the people involved. Have we any idea as to, because that's just over 50% of fires where an alarm has helped save the situation from becoming worse? Do we have any idea how that compares with other regions in Scotland, or is it a kind of pretty much a national picture?
That's certainly, I don't have the exact breakdown, but looking at the percentage from the number of fires to the number of premises with smoke detection fitted, I have a feeling that it's higher than a number of areas in Scotland, certainly higher than my previous area that I've worked in. I would report back, but we can confirm those figures and come back to you if you like.
Thanks very much for that. Crawford.
Thank you, Convener. I just want to clarify the annual target for fatal road traffic collision casualties is 4. Should that not be 0?
Certainly our aim for all of these fatalities would be 0. Our aim for all casualties would be 0. The way we identify our targets is we take a rolling 3-year average, and that allows us to set some sort of meaningful and challenging targets. Certainly, we would wish to keep them as low as possible, and we would wish them to be 0 for these elements.
But the fact that your target at the moment is 4, does that an inevitability that you think there's going to be at least 4 a year?
What we've done is to identify what the annual target is for road traffic collisions is we review our historical evidence, so we review our 3-yearly targets, and then that allows us to give you a 3-year average. Then we try to make a small improvement on that. So evidence would tell us that the road structures around here, there have always been a number of road traffic collisions that have had these significant outcomes. However, we will continue to work with all partners to drive these as low as possible, and our aim will be to get down to 0, and we'll try to work to that extent.
Thank you for that. Are there any other questions? Are there any comments on the report? Bob?
Thank you, Convener. Just referring back to page 33, the retirement of volunteer firefighter Mr. Dave Houston after 25 years. I just wonder, on behalf of the committee, could you thank him for his service and commitment to the community, and our best wishes for the future for him. Thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you for that, Bob, and can I echo those sentiments? I'm sure they reflect the views of the whole committee. Can we agree to note the report? Agreed. Thank you. The Vice Convener will take items 4.2 and item 5.
Thank you, Convener. Just a quick introduction. The police report before you covers the period 1st of October to 31st of December, which includes the Christmas period. The domestic violence is, as it should be, a priority matter for the police, and incidents are risk assessed upon future offending and the risk faced by the victim. Protection for the victim is always the highest priority, and there are examples of 3 such incidents within the report. With our increasing dependence on digital technology, cybercrime and in its various forms remains an ever-present threat, particularly to the elderly and vulnerable members of our society. And a further incident of this type is reported. To help counter this type of crime, a community officer attended the Royal Bank of Scotland in Blairgowrie to offer advice to customers concerning banking fraud, and this practice has been continued by staff to keep customers aware. Information was circulated to the more rural areas. Maintaining public safety is always a priority, none more so than on our roads. Our report covers the festive season and the campaign for drink and drug driving, which ran from 1st of December to the 2nd of January. Nationally, 8,632 drivers were stopped, with 565 drivers
detected for drink or drug driving offences. And for December, Perth and Kinross saw 8 reports for driving while under the influence of drink or drugs, the lowest in 5 years. However, speeding remains a constant problem. Tuesday the 13th of November saw an elderly driver intervention day held at Loch Leven's Larder, a joint event between Police Scotland, ROSPA and Age Scotland, which highlighted road safety for drivers over 65. This was a widely publicised event with people travelling from as far as Pitlochry and St Andrews, and the event included a free driving assessment which were fully booked. The oldest driver assessed was 90 years old, which is hope for all of us, I think. There is no report of his assessment. Members, the report includes a breakdown of crimes by ward, which may be of interest. And finally, there is a summary of incidents for the period April to December 2018, detailing 9 categories of criminal behaviour. Regrettably, 5 of these show increases, the highest being overall violent crime. At the last meeting, it was discussed that we would try and get a specialist officer in to discuss the work they do. And I'm pleased to say that we have with us today Inspector Duncan from the Sexual Offences Unit. So what I think, if I may, first of all, call Chief Superintendent Todd and Chief Inspector Scott, I've got the ranks right this time, to come forward and present the report and answer any questions, and then I'll ask Inspector Duncan to come forward. Gentlemen, over to you.
Morning. I'll just go straight into passing to Ian to ask him to go through the
£10 fine, Tom.
I was just going to try and talk my way through that one. So I'll just pass over straight to Ian.
Thank you and good morning all. Obviously appeared here in January to give an update over the festive period. So this is the wider 3-month review period. So I'll probably try and skirt over some of the incidents that have already been reported, but happy to take any questions. Probably just start off with hate crime in reflection of the terrible incidents that happened in New Zealand over the weekend, and perhaps try and offer some, obviously condolences, but obviously some confidence to elected members and communities in Perth and Kinross as to how our hate crime picture looks. It does stay on a steady reported basis. No particular group or individuals are showing particular anxiety or concern, and particularly in respect of the weekend's incidents. We have a close working relationship with the mosque in the bottom of the Glasgow Road. Community officers attend there on a weekly basis, and we encourage any members of the Muslim community to get in touch with any concerns they do have. Hate crime, as I have spoken about previously, tends to be more inappropriate use of language rather than directed abuse or violence against protected characteristics. Currently, our detection rate is very good. It's a priority investigation. At this review period, we're sitting about 80%. Currently, we're a little bit higher than that year to date, and that is high, not just within Tayside, but within the sort of national boundaries. But we continue to ask all persons who suffer either indirect, verbal or internet-based abuse to come forward, and we encourage that to go forward. I'll move on secondly to housebreakings, which has seen an unfortunate deterioration in our detection rate. Probably 2 reasons for that. One was last year our detection rate was probably double the national average, pretty much due to a couple of quite high quantity series being detected to individuals from Dundee and Edinburgh, so that maybe made it look a little bit higher. It has been a challenging year. Numbers are pretty much broadly the same as last year and down on the 5-year average, but I can hopefully provide you confidence that each housebreaking is looked at, investigated. Our community investigation unit take the lead in that area, and we rely on both Tayside and national resources to support that. We have a monthly meeting which is called our Acquisitive Crime Review meeting, which looks at working with our neighbouring areas, 5 Central Scotland, and on occasions Northern and Aberdeen as appropriate, to look at travelling criminals, which is a concern. always looking to encourage the public to get in touch and provide us with any information or concerns that they have about unusual behaviour, so we continue to focus on that area. I did speak previously in January about the Cooper Angus murder, the terrible conditions or the terrible circumstances that we came across there. We continue to support the local community and all those involved, including our own officers, which maybe takes me on to the wider Group 1 crime, which has seen an increase. Group 1 tends to be our more significant crime types by its very nature, but there's some anomalies that I'll maybe just mention as to maybe give a little bit of context around the increase or the apparent increase in that crime type. So what we tend to do with serious crimes, and D.I. Duncan will speak on a similar vein in relation to sexual offending, is once it's reported, we try to do a deep scan of the perpetrator and their victims to bring forward any further cases that may have happened to either that victim or other victims in the past. So some of the cases include what we class as cruel and unnatural treatment to children, which comes under Section 12 of the. Anyway, I don't want to go into the particular details, but it's often interfamiliar. So it's family members abusing part of their family, and you know, one case we're looking at the moment was 4 different incidents. We have a bit of an unusual one this year, which was a drugging offence. So there was 5 crimes in relation to that. We'd spoken previously at the board in relation to a modern slavery that we'd had, and that was 7 Romanian victims. So very quickly, 2 or 3 reports can lead to a dozen or 15 crimes. That's to do with the thoroughness and the professionalism in which the investigations take place. So although it may look initially as a poor thing, I'm confident that we are doing a full and thorough research into those perpetrators of crime to make sure we bring in all the evidence that we can in front of the courts. And we have seen some significant sentencing on the back of that within Police Scotland, locally and in Tayside, the last 2 or 3 years. Another, speaking about international hate crimes and significant incidents, I think we have to be aware that within the UK there's been a rise in serious crimes, and in particular the carrying of knives and offensive weapons, and the targeting of young people, often by other young people, which has seen a significant spike in deaths, unfortunately, murders and knife crime within, in particular, England and London. But I don't think we can ever be complacent. What I can say to elected members is that we have seen no significant rise in the use of offensive weapons or crimes within Perth and Kinross. Again, we can't be complacent. We did have an attempted murder in Viewfield Place just in the last 6 weeks or so, which involved a knife, an individual from Dundee who used that. So as was mentioned earlier, what is the target for these type of crimes? Ideally none, because one knife being used is an inch away from a murder. But the reality is, it is something we face as a society and as police officers on a day-to-day basis. And again, encourage members of the public, other professionals, to provide us with any information or intelligence that they have regarding knife crime. And that does come in quite regularly as well. On a positive side, we have seen with some of the work that was done last year to reduce the amount of disorder, primarily in the city centre and the South Inch, and both disorder, breach of the peace, Section 38s and vandalisms have seen significant drops. Again, not to be complacent, because unfortunately it is cyclical, as I mentioned previously, and we constantly work with partners and residents to try and focus on the next area which may become a concern to communities, and take proactive partnership work into those areas. The final thing that I would maybe mention is road traffic. Obviously appeared here numerous times in relation to different crime types associated with road policing, and that the next board, I hope to bring an officer that will be able to do a wee presentation on drug driving, which I know was raised at the last meeting. We focused a little bit this year more on speeding, because it is a cause of concern for residents and elected members. So some areas have fallen, perhaps in relation to insurance and driving offences, which tends to be more targeted on individuals. And by listening to communities, we have focused on the speeding work that's been getting done. Hopefully that provides positive feedback, but we continue to work both preventatively and to educate motorists rather than to be too prescriptive, but at times that is a requirement of something we do. So that will be the summary of my report.
Thank you, Chief Inspector. We'll open up for questions. If I could just ask one first, if I may. We mentioned about the terrible things that happened in New Zealand, probably the last country anybody would think of. When events like that are widely publicised, do you find from experience there is a surge in racial abuse or hate crime, if you want to put it that way?
The reality is that we step up nationally very quickly, and we look at matters nationally and we anticipate increases. They don't always follow, and sometimes there's no rhyme and reason why they do or don't follow. We haven't seen an increase here, but we're not looking internally, quite frankly. We look nationally very quickly, and the national network stands up. So we're quite alert to it. And the other issue, of course, is that we're much more visible around vulnerable premises and vulnerable individuals, which can increase reporting, which is a good thing. But it's actually potentially indicating to us as an underreporting before those events. So,
members, questions? Councillor McCall.
Thank you. It was mentioned by yourself, Vice Convener, that with the community officer in Blairgowrie been out talking about banking fraud, with rural banks closing quite drastically all over Perth and Kinross. Is this including internet fraud for banking? And if it is it also being rolled out across different rural areas across the area?
Unfortunately, we are seeing an increase in frauds, and in particular cyber-enabled frauds. We obviously have a growing population, an ageing population, and a wealthy population relative to other parts of the country, which makes us perhaps a target, some of the housebreakings. Pretty much these perpetrators will be national or internationally based, and it is just by luck whether they pick somebody in Blairgowrie, Kinross, Kinlochrannoch or Perth. But the same messages have gone out to partners, particularly in the banking industry, into the care network and social work for things to look out for. And we will continue to do that, obviously, as well. In my weekly bulletin, I've mentioned it on numerous occasions, things to look out for, unusual modus operandi, and to be aware of unexpected calls or internet contact.
Councillor Ingworth.
Thank you. Thank you for providing all the statistics by ward, not just because my ward, Almond and Erne, is the lowest. Can I ask some questions about the definitions that are used there, please? It talks about groups 1 to 5 and all group 1 and then all group 2. Can you tell me what the definitions of 1 to 5 and why it looks like all group 1 are higher than groups 1 to 5?
Yes, I can. I have explained that previously, but it becomes confusing, not just to elected members, but indeed to myself. And I think it might be best if I provided something in writing just for elected members and others' information. The form that I sort of print off weekly looks at Group 1 crime, which includes things like murder, culpable homicide, serious assaults, robbery, etc. And then some of the more unusual ones, such as cruel and unnatural treatment of children, threats and extortion. They're the highest tariff offences for the vast majority of people. Group 2 crime is effectively sexual offences, which DI Keith Duncan will speak about shortly. Group 3 is crimes of dishonesty. Group 4 includes things like fire raising, malicious mischief. Group 5 is other proactive crimes. So when I spoke about offensive weapons, carrying knives, supply of drugs, etc., they fall into that. And then Group 6 is miscellaneous offences such as common assaults, breach of the peace, and then Group 7 is motor vehicles. What I'll do, I think it might be helpful to elected members if I maybe produced a little document and share that through the convener, just so when we speak about the categories, everyone's cited on what it actually means, because there's a bit of technical jargon. I'm quite glad I brought my little notes there.
And can you explain why all Group 1 is higher than Groups 1 to 5?
What you've got to separate out are the numerics. So if we've got 2 murders last year and 3 murders this year, we've clearly got a 50% increase in our murders. Whereas, and Group 1 numerically is very, very small, thankfully. Once you start getting into Group 3 and Group 4 crime, which is crimes of dishonesty and antisocial behaviour, the numbers are into the thousands potentially in some local authority areas. So percentage differences can actually be hundreds before they're noticed, and that's the reason why. So I think it's having to look at both the numeric as well as the percentage.
Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Yeah, Chief Inspector Scott, you made reference in your report to the effort to target speeding, and I note an almost 30% increase in speeding offences between this year or between 2017 and 2018. Are you able to clarify whether this effort is in built-up areas, whether speeding is in built-up areas, or whether it's on trunk roads or country roads?
Perth and Kinross, as we're all aware, covers a huge variety of locations, and we have to concentrate to some degree on areas where we know or suspect that there has been accidents in the past, so it's a bit of intelligence led there. We also listen to what communities tell us, and while always welcome that, we don't want to just respond to 1 or 2 vociferous individuals who maybe have a particular hatred for motorists or speeding motorists. So it's cross-cutting. We rely on our locality sergeants to focus on the local complaints, who know the areas best, as particularly around schools, as you're aware, been working that. And then we rely on our road policing unit colleagues to go for those high tariff areas and more specialist nature. So it's a sort of root and branch approach to best respond to the various road types that we have within Perth and Kinross. And again, always happy for elected members, if they feel there's a particular concern in their area, to get in touch and highlight that to us, and we'll work with the Roads Department to do a bit of research into those locations, and then do the education enforcement to try and prevent, ultimately, keeping people safe, try and prevent accidents.
Councillor McEwan.
Referring to page 8 of your report, that's page 46 of our papers, there's measure number 25, which is the number of detections of drug supply, which has actually dropped. Does the increase in supply via online and sending products through the mailing system make it more difficult for your officers to detect this crime?
Two things there. It was a bit low at that time, and we've probably done a bit of focused work in relation to enforcement and drug warrants, which has reduced the gap from January onwards. So it's a slightly different picture now. It is very much intelligence-led, and it has to be recent intelligence. So when we get information either from whatever source, we have to take that in front of a procurator fiscal and then a sheriff. And if we're telling information that we received about 6 or 7 months ago, it's unlikely to really be considered as recent enough to enforce. So we're always looking to glean that intelligence from any form. We work very well with the Postal Service, but it is a challenge because as so many aspects of crime and indeed daily life go into the sort of internet world, that there is challenges there. But because at times we have intelligence-led operations which indicate people that we are looking at anyway and researching, and the close partnership work that we have with in particular Royal Mail and indeed HMP Perth, we can focus on that and bring individuals before the courts.
The other question I have refers to page 12 of your report, page 50 of our papers. There's a body of text there, but the last part of it goes on about trading standards and shops selling illegal tobacco products that were seized. Obviously, this has a monetary value for governments relating to tax paid, etc., etc. But is there not also an issue around about safety with cigarette products that are imported compared to the ones that are allowed within the EU?
Absolutely, it's a point well made, which I'm happy to highlight through the media as well. I've spoken previously in relation to controlled substances, drugs that people are getting from the internet, which can come from any part of the world, and you can buy something one week and it's something totally different the other week, and likewise with tobacco and indeed alcohol. And in fact, we have seen nationally some tragic circumstances of people drinking what they believe to be bona fide alcohol and it having terrible health effects very quickly. Cigarettes is likely to be something very similar, but perhaps more long term. So, yeah, very, very conscious that the long term effects of people abusing any type of obviously alcohol or drugs, but particularly those that are counterfeit, can be horrific.
Do we have any further questions? Any further questions? Any comments? Are we happy with the report? Thank you, gentlemen. If I may now get Inspector Duncan to come forward and just give us a brief intro on his work. There should be the red light comes on. Yeah.
That's excellent. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, elected members. Thanks very much, Deputy Convener. As an introduction, my name is Keith Duncan. I'm a Detective Inspector of the Divisional Rape Investigation Team of Tayside. I'm based in Dundee. Obviously, we covered the whole of Tayside. Chief Inspector Scott picked up on, as well as yourself, in relation to types of crimes and the grouping that we have and how we record them. Group 2 crimes essentially are all sexual offences. And that can range from the most serious sexual offence that we deal with, or I deal with, is rape. And it covers a number of other things, such as communicating indecently with a child, whether that's in person or whether that's over the internet. It also covers aspects of indecent images and other kind of, I would say, minor sexual assaults is how we categorise them. But I have a list here, you can probably have a look at them in slower time as to what these actually are. The kind of model to the PPU, so when I talk about PPU, it's a Public Protection Unit. At Tayside, every division in Scotland have a Public Protection Unit, and they work alongside the CID, so there's CID and Public Protection. And the strands to the PPU, I have, as I say, the Rape Investigation Unit. We have Online Sexual Team, we have Child and Adult Protection, we have Domestic Abuse, we have Offender Management. So they all sit under the kind of larger umbrella of Public Protection within Police Scotland, and certainly within D Division in Tayside. We've supported, certainly in D Division, by national teams, so we've got representation from a national rape task force. So if there's any more kind of demanding inquiries in terms of resource-intensive inquiries, then we can call upon our colleagues in the national teams who, fortunately for us, sit in Dundee, but they cover the north of Scotland. Likewise, for domestic, we have a national domestic violence team, and again, they'll supplement and support the local teams in, and it's a bit more resource intensive and certainly demanding on local resource. Lastly, we have the MIT. Now, heard of the MIT, that is the Major Investigation Team, who pick up on a lot of the kind of more serious inquiries, murders. But again, if something more serious happens that we need to call upon them, then they're there in Dundee and able to obviously service Perth and Angus and the division as a whole. As with any sexual crime, for me, the pathway we take, it has to be victim-centred. Right from the very beginning, it's engagement with the victim, it's what they want, and that could be a very slow pace. It could be that somebody wants to tell us something that's happened 20 years ago and that's on their terms. So it'll be a case of we'll send out a specialist officer who's a sexual offences liaison officer, and they will pick up and record details, including evidence if there's evidence available, but certainly in terms of more non-recent or historic crimes, they'll pick up, and it could take 2-3 days. I've known them to take 2 or 3 weeks just to get the specific detail that we require for that. As we adopt the victim-centred approach, we'll have to get our pathways right. We'll always achieve this gold standard. Vulnerability is huge. We deal with vulnerable victims every single day. That's added difficulty and challenges around sexual crime, and vulnerability could be through age, through mental health, or any other learning difficulties they may have. What we have and what we'll pick up on is we've clearly had an increase in reporting of sexual crime, and unfortunately a decrease in detection, but I'll pick up on the positives of that. If somebody tells us about a crime and they no longer wish to engage with the police or any kind of judicial process, then unfortunately it's still recorded as a crime. And it may be on their best interest that we don't pursue an investigation because of the impact that may have on that individual, on their employment, on their mental health, or on their family units. Then we would take a decision not to pursue it. However, it is still recorded as a crime. There are times when we'll have to look into that crime, and that could be there's a risk to the public, and if there is a public safety element to that, then we'll have to pursue it in overall the interests of the public. But what we find nowadays is that any kind of crime that's reported to us, Chief Inspector Scott talked about kind of suspect scanning. We'll do full research into that suspect. So it could be that an individual comes forward to the police after 2 or 3 years, they've suffered some horrendous domestic abuse. Well, we'll look into that individual and carry out full research on them to pick up any other previous partners. We'll then go to the previous partners, what we call a proactive approach. We'll rigorously take apart that individual's background to find any opportunity at all to bring him before a court for him to be answerable for what he's subjected that particular victim to. So along with that, we get a recording increase because we're proactively finding victims, we're encouraging them to report to the police. And what we'll probably pick up on as well is the fact that people are more willing and encouraged with confidence to report these horrendous crimes to the police. So obviously the cornerstone of Scots law is corroboration, and that's how we eventually get somebody to the court, as we're looking for alternative ways to corroborate that individual's account through the proactive reporting. And that extends to crimes such as prostitution and human trafficking. We again scan our social media, and nowadays everything's done online, and again that extends to some of the sexual crimes. So prostitution, human trafficking, you'd be amazed to know how many individual adverts we have Tayside, Perth Kinross as a whole. We will look to visit these premises to make sure that individuals are safe, and potentially there are crimes again that they're going to report to us. We'll pick up on that and we'll report it. So again, that all adds to the overall picture and numbers of Group 2 crimes. The challenges that we have, we've heard it a couple of times today, the fire service and some of my colleagues here will talk about the influence of social media and cyber crimes, so the cyber-enabled crimes. Some of the difficulties we have with this, if you can imagine, we have an individual who reports what's classed in the media as sextortion. So perhaps a private act in their home address has been videoed. An individual from, say, Turkey can then tap into their account and threaten them by money. If they don't pay them money, then they will expose the picture again through social media profiles. Trying to detect that and get into other kind of law enforcement in Turkey or even America, challenges through Facebook, Instagram, they're all very, very difficult, and they're very, very time consuming, but they do take time. We do get there, but that's just some of the challenges that we have. In terms of non-recent crimes or historical crimes, for instance, I had somebody last week who'd come in 10 years ago. It was in Perth Kinross. They'd been at the local disco back then. They made their way out of the nightclub, got into a taxi, and unfortunately were sexually assaulted by the taxi driver. So right away, the individual confidence to tell us, we take them on the pathway, victim focused, put them in touch with their partners. But for us as an organisation, to try and detect that and pick up any evidence is of course very, very challenging, because there's no forensic opportunities, there's no CCTV from 10 years ago, records from the taxis back then, no description. So that's just some of the things, kind of touching the very, very surface of the challenges that we see. It's a very, very complex area of business, I would say, the internet, and we too have our challenges trying to, as I say, tune in to other law enforcement agencies across Scotland. But we are on the kind of front foot with that. Hopefully you've seen in the news just last night, one of our ACCs talking about a new campaign we've got called Stop It Now. So we're right on the front foot with that, and that's directly aimed at perpetrators. So anybody who is careless enough to engage with a child for the purposes of any kind of sexual contact, then they'll be warned of the consequences, that they will be caught, they will be brought before a court. And on top of that, they've got the whole issue of their personal life falling apart, their families and their employment. So there is, on top of that, we're going on the front foot, but there's support agencies that we'll signpost them to make sure that everybody is getting the correct support that they need. Just to kind of finish up on, every other sexual crime, or every sexual crime, just because we can't detect it, it goes through a rigorous process of re-investigation. So in terms of the most serious sexual crimes of rape, that's subjected to a peer review. So there is rigorous processes in place that another detective inspector or more senior officer will have a look at what inquiry has been undertaken by the DCs and the DS and the DI, and that will be reviewed entirely. So there is opportunities there. It's not just a one-stop. It goes to a number of channels just for completeness and assurance. So what I've done, I've been in the post 18 months now, and I think coming back to why I'm here is to pick up on why the records, or the number of records have increased and the detection rates have decreased. When I speak to my partners about that in Razak and Perth, it's because they've got this increased confidence in the police. The pathways we give them, how we treat them, it's all based on, as I said, the victim-centred approach. That they have this confidence to come forward, but no, we're not going to push them into things. They know that if they don't want to go to court, they don't need to go to court all the time. So it is more victim-focused, victim-centred. We've done a lot of work recently with universities and colleges in relation to our we call it a rape campaign, but it picks up on issues of consent, educating students on consent, the danger of having alcohol and rendering yourself unable to give consent. So that's through in Dundee, it's through in Perth, and it's through Angus. And we're working closely with Razak and the Violence Against Women Partnership for that. We've also had some funding, and we've driven with our self-referral process. And again, that's been through Perth and Kinross and other local policing authorities. And that's for somebody who believes that they're subjected of any kind of sexual assault. They can go and get a self-referral, a medical examination, completely independent of the police. But at the same time, they're afforded the same pathways, the same support, the same advocacy. Samples are kept, and if they want to engage with the police later on, then they can. So that is all there. I don't think there's anything else to pick up on, but if there's any questions I could answer or anything else you want covered.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Councillor McCall.
Thank you very much. That was very informative and quite enlightening as well. My question really is, you mentioned that you work with universities and colleges about consent and general behaviours around sexual content. But what about schools? Because a lot of young people in schools have, it seems to be almost unfettered access to online pornography, which to some extent normalises in those young minds what is inappropriate behaviour in terms of sexual relations and consent. And so I was just curious to know what activities are going on in schools. Because I think by the time they get to universities and colleges, it may be a little late. People's ideas may already be formed.
It's a great point.
Both the perpetrators and indeed the victims, who may think that they're not victims at all because of this normalisation.
That's it. I think, again, go back to social media. It does paint several instances of being a normalised behaviour. We do have our preventions and interventions partners within each LPA who attend schools, they educate people. We've got social media campaigns as well that talk about consent. It picks up on if you've had too much alcohol to drink, and that's directed both at perpetrators and witnesses. But it's something I would like to see. I mean, having young kids myself, and I'm very aware of how they view social media, how they look at it on the internet. So they have themselves, they're at a school in Perth and Kinross, and they have had inputs on keeping yourself safe, probably a bit young for the kind of sexual side of it, but I can't really comment on what they maybe do in the kind of upper primary. Certainly in secondary, they do.
I'm maybe just coming there, and so it's a really good point. And partners in education again are on the front foot. Often it's called social and moral education, and they speak about positive relationships and relationships involving same-sex partners, etc. So as a community, we've moved forward a long way. Our community officers will support any of those inputs as required, either locally or if there's a particular instance or instances of inappropriate contact between children, we would look for specialist support in that. Looking at the universities, we tend to concentrate around the freshers' fairs because majority of universities come together at the same time. We have national campaigns and we support those when people are perhaps away from home for the first time and can be vulnerable, making new relationships. There's also a place for parents to have open and honest conversations with their children and understand the challenges and pressures that can be put on young people. And again, that early engagement is so crucial from parents for young people to be able to say that there's something not right here or I've got a problem, and so we'd always encourage that.
So in light of all of that and the engagement with schools where it's not just children, there are young adults technically, especially in the slightly older school children. How many instances of perhaps sexual assault or related issues are reported but perhaps are not necessarily pursued as a criminal matter from the school demographic?
I don't actually have specific numbers. A lot of the offending that I deal with in terms of school age children, so under be 16, would be more the kind of public protection arena. I'm not aware, just I have a general interest in that area. For us, we had a slight increase at universities in Dundee, but we were in there, like Chief Inspector Scott said, we're on the front foot at Freshers' Weeks. We redeploy at times of holidays when students are more likely to engage in alcohol. We're there, we make regular visits. Some of our late shift PPU detectives will go to university campuses just to make sure that people know they're there, and we speak to maybe individuals who appear more vulnerable. But in terms of numbers, I couldn't give you figures.
We don't break those numbers down by location, but what I would say to members is that we're rightly looking into a very complex area of business, and as the DI says, that one of the challenges we have around the school-age children is it's non-contact offending. So there's a picture of a school pupil and it's circulated amongst the whole class. They're all victims, they're also all accused of distributing child pornography. So how do you deal with that? And that's the challenge for us as an organisation, working with others and working with schools and partners. So it's a really, really complex area, but it's one where we've got loads of support, a lot of focus with specialists, particularly from the cyber-enabled side of the business, but also from partners like RASAC and such like. And please be reassured, we absolutely lean on them to almost hold our feet to the fire. They act as a good barometer for us, that if we feel something's good or something's not good, we'll test it against them, what's their understanding, because they will often get told more than we will because of their position. But it's a very, very complex area of business as we try and sort of separate out that offending behaviour from the public protection agenda, because it can cross over very easily.
Councillor Coates. What proportion, if you have figures, you possibly don't, of sex crimes occur within families, and how much more difficult is it to detect than other kinds of sex crime?
It varies greatly. We've got, you can have non-recent interfamilial offences whereby there is no forensic opportunities available just by the nature of how long it's taken. In terms of figures, I couldn't tell you what they are exactly, which relate specifically to families, but the challenges are there, and they'll be treated as well as any other inquiry if it was perhaps a rape or a stranger rape, we can call it that. So it's a difficult one to answer. I don't have figures. I don't think that's in our...
No, I think I would just say anecdotally it'd be a significant amount, and without wanting to give it a specific, I would consider possibly as high as a quarter. That's maybe getting up to the top end, but it's not unusual to see, unfortunately, that type of crime offence, whereas complete stranger, other than internet-based, complete stranger crimes are very unusual. So that maybe gives you a little flavour of it all.
Any further questions? Nope. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for the reports this morning. Very welcome. You, of course, are welcome to stay for the rest of the fund if you wish. Members, will move on now to item 5, which is the Community Planning Partnership update. This paper is the regular activity update from the Perth Kinross Community Planning Partnership, covering the period from the end of January and taking in the CPP board meeting of the 8th of February. Local Action Partnerships update board meetings on a rotating basis, and the 8th of February meeting heard updates from Highland and Strathtyre on their progress since agreeing to split last September. And following the improvement plan approved last December, the chairs and lead officers of the LAPs met in January to consider taking forward the first tranche of actions in the first quarter. The first round of the Community Investment Fund received 149 applications, totalling £1.6 million against the proposed budget of £600,000. Ward panels have already met and made recommendations to an executive subgroup of the Strategic Policy and Resources Committee. A separate report with recommendations for the second round is scheduled to go to the committee on the 17th of April. The CPP board has agreed to undertake a governance review of community planning in Perth and Kinross, which is due to start in the next few weeks. Social Security Scotland attended the latest CPP board meeting and updated on the rollout of the new benefit system for Scotland, including how it will work with the Council's Welfare Rights team and other partners. The board also had an update on the progress producing the first local child poverty action report. This will summarise actions taken to date to meet targets set out in the Child Poverty Scotland Act of 2017. The draft report will be presented to board and council before being submitted to the Scottish Government. Finally, regarding the third sector interface, the CPP board received an update from PCAVs, which has been given the new outcomes framework by the Scottish Government. The 4 specific duties are detailed in the paper. It is recommended that this committee notes the progress since January 2019 on community planning objectives. Do we have any questions? Councillor McEwan.
Item 4.3 of the papers on page 56 discusses the Local Child Poverty Action Plan report, which you're leading on. Is that going to come to this committee, or is it going to come to full council?
Full council. Any further questions? Are we happy to agree with the report?
Sorry, just very briefly, I thought members might be interested to know, if they haven't seen the papers for this afternoon's executive subcommittee of the SPNR committee. There's a report before that which has recommendations to approve £580,000 worth of applications recommended by the Local Action Partnership subcommittees out of the £600,000 fund. So that decision will be hopefully taken this afternoon, but I think that gives you some indication of the commitments to the funds that have been recommended by local action partnership committees in view of the level of oversubscription to the fund.
Thank you, Gabrina. Are we then? Oh, Councillor Shires.
Comment on that, that's really good news. And this is, definitely about sort of empowering communities, that they, about their priorities being available to access funding. So that's very welcome.
Thank you. Are we happy to agree with the... Oh, sorry, Councillor Gray.
Yes, thank you. In view of the oversubscription towards it, what's the future for other years in terms of this fund?
I'll ask Fiona if she would answer that one first.
Councillor Gray, can you hear me? Is that all right? Yeah, I never know if the microphone's working or not. The question is about what's the long-term future of the fund. Is that correct? At the moment, we have budget allocated for 2 years of the Community Investment Funds. We're about to start year 2, as Councillor Braun, as the convener, Vice Convener, indicated. We're bringing a report to SPNR on the 17th of April. With a summary of how year 1 has gone and some recommendations for how year 2 should operate. I think it's also worth flagging to committee members that this initiative is part of a much bigger picture, which is a joint agreement between COSLA and Scottish Government, that local authorities should be moving to have 1% of their allocatable budgets determined through what's called community choice. And the most common mechanism for that is participatory budgeting. But there are other ways, including the Community Investment Fund, of involving communities very actively in how money is spent at local level.
Do we have any further questions or comments? Are we happy to agree with the paper? Good. Thank you, Convener. Back to you.
Thanks very much for that. Item 6 is the housing contribution statement, and Claire Mailer, Head of Housing, will give a presentation on housing's contribution to health outcomes. Over to you, Claire. So, Claire, I don't know if you want to lift your mic up a bit.
This morning, sorry. There we go. Is that better? Each health and social care strategic commissioning plan is required to include a housing contribution statement, which details the contribution that housing makes to supporting the health and social care outcomes. So the paper that committee has been asked to consider this morning provides an overview of some of the activity that we are progressing to support these outcomes and objectives. I must also point out that this paper has already been to the IJB and presented to the IJB. I also delivered a similar presentation at the National Housing Festival last week at the SCCC, which I think is good recognition to the teams of the really good work that they're leading on. Most of us here will take the fact that we have a place to call home for granted. We won't generally give much thought to the potential impacts on our lives if we were not to have a home. Housing fulfills in that very first instance that basic need that we all have for a roof over our head. And until our need for housing is met, it's impossible for us to move on and achieve our wider outcomes in life. Depending on the standard of housing, its location, its type and its size, it has got the potential to negatively impact on our outcomes or indeed positively impact on them. So overcrowding, homelessness, dampness, poor neighbourhood condition, fuel poverty and social isolation can all have a negative impact on a person's health, well-being and indeed lead to an increased risk of health problems, poor emotional well-being and poor general mental health. So we can't underestimate that impact that housing has and the role that housing has to play. And I think the extract on the slide articulates that very well. Our local housing strategy that you're all familiar with sets out our key priorities and how these will be delivered. And you'll see, I'm not going to talk about them in any detail, but you'll see the many overlaps and links here between our vision and the work that we do that supports the delivery of the national health and well-being outcomes. All of our new homes meet or exceed the housing for varying needs standards, ensuring that our mainstream housing is barrier-free with the flexibility to meet the existing but also the changing needs of most households, including those with temporary or permanent physical disabilities. Through our new build developments at Scone, Blairgowrie, Stanley, and a number of homes were designed to facilitate independent living to meet the specific needs of households in the area. So, for example, they included wet floor showers, wheelchair access, automatic door closures, wet rooms. The properties have all been built to a high standard with a range of features included assisted bathing facilities, additional bedrooms for carers, lower or adapted kitchen units, and in some cases structures to support the installation of hoists should they be needed in the future. Through our allocations policy, we've reduced waiting lists significantly, we've tackled overcrowding and supported 221 of our social tenants to move to homes that better meet both their housing needs but also their medical needs. The need for collaborative working between homelessness and health and social care is clear. Recent health and homelessness research in Scotland evidenced clear links between homelessness and poor health outcomes. The Scottish Government have also been very clear in their commitment and request for more joined-up approaches between homeless services, health and social care partnerships, and drug and alcohol services. This is a really challenging area for all of us, but we've delivered, as you're probably aware, some significant achievements over the past year. We've successfully delivered our Home First transformation, and by eliminating and reducing the use of temporary accommodation and moving people directly into settled accommodation, we're having a positive impact on the outcomes for many households. We're reducing the stigma, the duration, and the experience of homelessness. And I feel a wee bit like a stuck record, but you are aware, obviously, of the significant praise and recognition that we've received for our approach in relation to Home First and the outcomes that we're delivering at both a local and indeed at a national level. A rapid rehousing plan was supported by the Health and Social Care Partnership, and one of our key initial actions now going forward will actually to undertake some research here locally to gain an understanding of the local homelessness context and the links with health. And that research will help us to inform further improvements going forward. Our floating housing support service enables vulnerable people to live independently and maximise their independence. And the Care Inspector has awarded us excellent grades last year for the quality of care and support and the quality of staffing and leadership. Last year, we appointed an Older Persons Project Development Officer to support our service to respond to and meet the many cross-cutting issues affecting older people. We've recently developed a housing options guide for older people, which provides a wide range of really useful information. And that work has enabled us to provide individuals with housing information which assists them to make informed choices around their current, but also round and about their future housing needs. We understand that household income and high housing costs can impact on a person's health and well-being, and a recently developed rent affordability model demonstrates that our rent levels remain the lowest in the area, and in fact we're sitting currently as the 6th lowest local authority social rent in Scotland. And I think it's really interesting. I've been doing some of the work on child poverty and actually really appreciating the impact that our significantly lower rents are having on households generally. I think it's been fairly significant. Compulsive hoarding is challenging to treat because many people who hoard do not consider it to be an issue. They often have little awareness of their disorder and how it impacts on their life. On others, and it's often associated with anxiety and depression. And our teams out there in the field do come across hoarding on a fairly regular basis. And because of this, the Housing Service recently led on the introduction of a hoarding protocol in partnership with colleagues from the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and indeed the Health and Social Care Partnership. And at the heart of this collective approach is a real person-centred focus to support tenants and residents to regain control of their lives and their homes. We continue to deliver one-to-one digital skills training to our tenants, and through our estate-based initiatives, you're probably all fully aware of the range of opportunities that our tenants are involved in to help shape, influence and improve the services that we deliver. Again, in recognition of the impact that poor quality housing can have on a person's health and well-being, we're progressing a wide range of measures to support the provision of good quality housing in the area. Our capital investment programme, capital improvements over the last 5 years has resulted in investment of over 93 million. Vast majority of our stock, 96.1.5%, meets the Scottish Housing Quality Standard, again consistently above the national average, and our tenant satisfaction survey has really evidenced the impact of these improvements. And as you can see from the slide and probably within the report, we're progressing a wide range of activities and improvements to ensure that our properties are as energy efficient as they possibly can be, minimising fuel poverty for many households. We own and manage 7 sheltered housing complexes, providing 190 homes to older people throughout the area. This year, we've invested just short of £1 million in major refurbishment works at 2 of our sheltered housing schemes, Works have included the construction of a new glazed sunroom, landscaping, exterior lighting, seating areas, the installation of assisted bathing facilities. And the new designs within these sheltered housing complexes make the circulation areas brighter, safer and more comfortable to move about in, and in particular are assisting people with dementia. We're supporting a wide range of social activities within our sheltered housing units, and we do extend these to older residents who live in the wider community. So they're not just exclusive to our own residents who live within the sheltered housing complexes. Our number of tenants within sheltered housing units with dementia has increased, and we've enhanced our training so that our support staff are equipped to meet these changing needs. Staff in sheltered housing complexes have been delivering the Care About Physical Activity programme. The Zero Waste initiative has resulted in joint working between staff and residents, delivering cooking sessions, improving the health and well-being of tenants, and in some cases addressing social isolation issues. We continue to build on intergenerational work with primary and indeed secondary schools, so there's quite a range of activities going on in some of our sheltered housing units involving both pupils and our elderly residents. And a sheltered housing support service was evaluated last year under quality of care and support and quality of leadership, and graded as very good in both of these categories. In partnership with the Health and Social Care Partnership, we've expanded the use of technology-enabled care by the expansion of the Smart Flat, enabling people with learning disabilities to enhance their independent living skills. Again, also working in partnership with Health and Social Care, we aim to ensure that suitable housing and/or support is available to prevent admission to hospital, but also to deliver that seamless service for people who are discharged from hospital. You're probably all aware of our garden maintenance scheme, and I would also point out that we undertook a review of special needs housing relatively recently. That was informed by feedback by over 500 stakeholders, and the findings from that review were really clear. Current accommodation with support options are clearly highly valued by people who live there. Overall feedback was very positive, but we have taken a number of recommendations from that review, themed them into 4 work streams that you can see detailed on the slide, and we've established our independent living group, which is jointly chaired by housing and health and social care colleagues. So a number of work streams there looking at planning ahead and identifying need, ensuring that we've got clear and effective processes in place to facilitate a person's pathway into appropriate supported housing, and maximising those successful transitions. We're reviewing the pathways for people requiring specialist housing. So lots of good work, but clearly still a number of key challenges that we need to collectively address. Some of our key challenges, as you would understand, include the changing demographics in Perth and Kinross, particularly relating to an ageing population, continuing increasing demands for adaptations to existing homes, the increasing range and complexity of requirements for housing support to help people live independently within the community, and the need for that specific housing and health focus on some of the vulnerable groups that you can see there on the slide. So in the coming months, we intend to progress a number of further actions in a number of areas, the collation of robust housing support and care needs information on current but also on future demand. We intend to develop a modelling tool, or we've started to develop a modelling tool which will support that short, medium and longer term planning for accommodation and support. We want to further explore the use of technology-enabled care solutions. In fact, I've just come from a meeting first thing this morning about that. And we need to develop an older person's housing support and care strategy, detailing plans for service transformation and remodelling of any existing accommodation, and the delivery potentially of new models of older persons housing. Myself and a number of colleagues went off to Fife to visit some older persons care villages a couple of weeks ago, which was really interesting. So hopefully you can see the work that we're progressing is really positively impacting on people's outcomes by enabling people to live independently at home. We do remain committed to support the delivery of the Health and Social Care Partnership outcomes. I think they're collective outcomes, they don't just sit with the partnership. and we've identified a range of actions detailed within the report that we will progress going forward in the course of next year.
Claire, thank you very much for that informative presentation on the housing contribution statement. Are there any questions on either the presentation or the statement? I've got Councillor Gray, then Councillor McEwen and Councillor McCall. I'll look in this direction as well. So we've got Councillor Coates after that. But start with Councillor Gray.
Thank you. Claire, that was a wonderful presentation, and there's no doubt the housing sector are doing particularly well in Perth Kinross and are in good hands. The question of sheltered housing, it all tends to be in local authority housing areas, is that correct?
It all tends to be in local authority areas.
In a housing authority area, yeah.
In the main.
Ownership.
Ownership. I have an issue somehow or other with, in the planning sector, I put this point to them some time ago, that with a scarcity of carers, with a large number of people coming to Perth Kinross to work, a number actually have parents who tend to follow them, elderly parents. And I have this feeling that there's a case for having sheltered housing within private developments, whereby we could have, say, a bank of sheltered housing within a development of a large number of houses, whereby the elderly parents of, let's say, working families could reside in sheltered housing, have their independence, but have carers on hand, family members on hand. And I just cannot see that this is not a direction we should move in. Thank you. Would you agree?
Okay, I think that's a very good question, and certainly what I would say to you is obviously we've got our own sheltered housing. The work that we want to do in terms of the kind of the wider strategic planning around and about older people, and that's work that we're doing in partnership with health and social care colleagues, is actually look at the wider housing, health care and accommodation needs of the older population and how we can really plan for the future. So some of that might be the remodelling of our local authority housing and sheltered housing, but that will also be looking at the longer term demands and requirements across all sectors and really seeing how we can support and inform and influence that going forward in the future.
I think the Director wants to add to that, Tom.
And I think, sort of building on from your question, Councillor Gray, and also from Claire's answer, I mean, we're aware that developers are now looking at, sort of what they're actually building, sort of, and aware that, sort of the demographics are changing, sort of, and what they need to be able to build to sell, but, sort of within a context of, sort of the fact that none of us are getting any younger, and particularly for areas like Perth and Kinross, then there is a growing demand.
I think there's also been a trend of third sector operators of sheltered housing moving to a different model from traditional sheltered housing, either to older people's housing or amenity housing, and that also changes the offer or the variety of older people's housing that is available locally. So I think again that's something that we need to factor into our housing needs assessment, and also why we're looking at how it is done elsewhere in Scotland to see what we need to either replicate or adapt for Perth and Kinross circumstances. So, Councillor McEwen next.
Medical adaptations in care and repair plays an important part in health and social care, and allowing residents to stay in their own homes independent for longer. That in itself is cost-effective healthcare, and hence we have the links with the IGB. We obviously make adaptations to our own housing, current housing stock, older housing stock, to meet individual residents' needs when they move into these homes. Do we have a report that details the spend on our current housing stock and also the changes and adaptations we're making to brand new houses that are coming in as well?
I mean, obviously we build our new houses to housing with varying needs standards, and we also attempt to future-proof them by doing things like installing the plumbing and servicing components at ground floor so that you can install a bathroom or a wet room there at a later stage. And we also include things like demountable partitions so you can then open up that bathroom to a living room or downstairs bedroom. The facility to have have tracked hoists fitted is built into the new house developments at when we're building them. So again, that's readily adaptable, so you can provide that same housing as people's needs changes or their physical abilities change over a period of time. I don't know whether Claire can give you a breakdown, the actual figures and the other aspects of your question, Tom.
I don't have, certainly in terms, the question was in terms of spend. I don't know if John will be able to give us a rough idea, but I can certainly get that information for you. What I can add is, having had a quick look, we have approximately, or in excess of 630 wheelchair adapted properties within our stock, and over 1,200 ambulant disabled properties. But we do have, a fairly significant number of properties where we're installing wet floor level access showers and a range of, range of measures to support properties. John, I don't know if you've got any, you won't have any financial information, but I can get that. We could pull that off.
We also do things like, all our new build houses have imperial-sized large doors which are wheelchair accessible, rather than having to, create wider door openings as somebody needs a wheelchair in later stage of life. And you get the economies of scale by having that, factored into the design stage for all the new houses from the outset. So, did you have a supplementary, Tom, or are you okay? Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Claire, for the presentation. It was very enlightening and very helpful. I have a couple of questions, if I may. On pages 63 and 64, I welcome that in the assessment of housing needs in section 2.3, the challenge of meeting the needs of vulnerable groups is recognised. However, when it comes to section 2.4 and the areas to be explored further, it's silent on the needs of these particular groups and those vulnerable. And I'm particularly concerned, as you probably will be used to by now, with adults with learning disabilities who have been recognised, and I single those out because in previous reports in terms of safety and a lot of other measurements and factors, adults with learning disabilities are recognised as one of the most highly vulnerable groups that we have throughout Perth and Kinross, given the size of the population and the vulnerability that exists. So I'm just a bit concerned that it's not included in section 2.4 as an area for additional focus. So perhaps you give me an update on that, please.
Okay. It's certainly included in the statement itself, and the housing needs assessment is something that we're working closely with NHS colleagues, something we're working very closely with children's services colleagues to get a handle on the demand and the capacity of provision that we need to provide. I'm sure Claire can give you more information about the officer working group of the independent living group who are focused directly on that.
Thank you, Convener. It's just that in this section of the report it's not identified as an area to be addressed, so I'm just curious to why it's omitted.
I mean, a lot of that work very much surrounds the first two bullet points under section 2.4 in terms of the collation of that robust housing needs demand analysis. So it's maybe not been quite specific within the report, but certainly the first couple of bullet points there absolutely includes all groups in terms of their health, housing and care and support requirements. And certainly the work of the independent living group, please be absolutely assured, covers all of these groups.
Absolutely.
Thank you. The second question is actually about the independent living group, which I think is a very, very welcome development. But I think to be truly effective, it needs to be as wide-reaching as possible. And following on a little bit from Councillor Gray's comment about sheltered housing, a lot of the citizens in Perth and Kinross don't all reside in local authority properties. They are very often housed with private landlords or other social housing providers. And I think if we're going to have a really, truly person-centred approach to those, particularly those vulnerable groups, then we need to have as wide a stakeholder community as possible. So perhaps, if you could tell me what the stakeholder community is likely to be. I know they've not been defined yet. In fact, who all sits on this independent living group, if it's just people in Perth and Kinross or else. And the other section is what third-party partners will be involved in stakeholders as well as just residents and citizens. Because it's quite possible that some people may be, moving from home into a private landlord, for example, and they're really dropping off the cliff edge.
Yeah, I think the points that you've put forward are extremely well made, Councillor McCall. Certainly one of the things that I have been seeking officers to do is to engage with people like Capability Scotland as a third sector player and provider of specialist housing locally. I think, I don't know whether Claire can expand further on how the stakeholder engagement is going to be refined and developed.
Okay, in answer to the first point of your question in terms of the group to be as wide-reaching as possible, please be absolutely assured that it is. We are not focusing here purely on local authority housing. The independent living group is a joint group that's managed and led in partnership, in equal partnership between housing and health and social care colleagues, and covers all groups and all communities with any particular needs for housing. So absolutely all groups are included, and it doesn't just have a focus on housing, it has a focus on accommodation outcomes as well. So I think absolutely please be assured about that. In terms of the stakeholder consultation that was undertaken to inform the formation of the group, stakeholder consultation involved a wide range of service users and indeed families and carers, and indeed staff were involved in that. The group, as I say, is jointly led. We have senior managers from housing, so service managers from housing, health and social care. Myself and Diane, head of adult services, are also involved in that group, along with some of our strategic planning colleagues, both from health and social care point of view, and also our housing development colleagues, because we need to factor some of the outputs from the work that we're doing into the local housing strategy, and indeed into our future strategic housing investment plan. But also engaging with, to widen your question there, registered social landlords and other key stakeholders will obviously also inform and be involved in the group and the work groups as they're progressing it taken forward.
I think if you're wanting further input into the development of the ongoing stakeholder engagement, Councillor McCall, that's something I'd very much welcome, and I think officers would be happy to discuss and develop with you. So.
I just want to thank you for your reply. It's appreciated. I was really referring to the one page at the appendix, the graphic, where it says stakeholders. There'll be further details as the project progresses. So I appreciate that you've had prior consultation that led to the setting up of the independent living group. It's just, where are you going further? Because at the moment, when I look at the stakeholders, it feels like a tops-down approach rather than a need-based delivery upwards. So that was trying to understand. Thank you.
I think we had Councillor Coates next.
Thank you, Convener. Claire, thank you for an excellent presentation. However, I'd like to touch on energy efficiency. How, whilst I appreciate the new build council properties will all meet the latest regulations and everything else, how is the energy efficiency of the older properties in the council stock being monitored, both in regards to insulation, all the heating systems, some of which are very, very inefficient, and what steps are being taken to rectify this?
Okay. I don't know whether Claire would like me to pass that on to John Cruikshank, Harry. Certainly the report and the presentation make reference of the £23 million that the council has invested in improving the improvements to our stock, and that includes new central heating systems, efficient boilers, and triple glazed windows. We have also had what I would describe as probably one of the leading programs under HEEPS ABS, which is Home Energy Efficiency Programme, area-based initiatives, schemes, which has done things like the external wall insulation programs in North Muirton and Craigie. It has done things like provide insulation and energy efficiency measures in a wide variety of homes. We've done it across tenure as well, working in collaboration with Scottish and Southern Energy through their energy company obligation monies to ensure that you didn't just leave out the privately owned houses in the development. So, John, can you expand on or address Councillor Coates' concerns there?
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, I mean, I really just expand really just on some of the points that Councillor Barrett's made there. In terms of central heating systems, we've really focused hard on improving the quality and the efficiency of the central heating systems that we have in our stock. Since 2012, we have installed 5,821 new central heating systems, which is actually 76% of the stock, and that's really brought the age of our central heating systems a lot newer. We had some really old systems, but the average age of our heating systems is now much newer. As you rightly pointed out, Councillor Barrett, triple glazing, we're probably one of the few local authorities that now has triple glazing in 36% of our stock now, which is really quite an achievement as well. We've focused hard on gas connections, again over the past few years, and we now have 82% of the stock with access to mains gas. We've managed to get 1,700 new connections to the network, again over the past 6-7 years as well, which has been really helpful in terms of improving the energy efficiency of people's heating systems. Renewable technologies, we've now fitted 588 houses with solar PV, 395 homes with solar water heating, and 156 sorry, I've got my figures slightly wrong there. We've got 395 houses with solar PV, 156 homes with solar water heating, and 37 with heat pumps. We're expanding the heat pump programme, and again, we've managed to get grant funding through the Warm Homes Fund to help us expand that, and that's currently ongoing now. Installation-wise, we've worked hard to capitalise on the HEAPS programme, as Councillor Barrett mentioned there. We now have external wall insulation on 1,836 council houses, which is really 25% of the stock. Cavity wall insulation in 5,012, and internal wall insulation in 217, which really gives us 94% of the stock now has a wall insulation of some kind, which is good. Other areas we've concentrated on things like room and roof insulation, flat roof insulation wherever we can. And indeed, we've actually gone back and looked at some of the earlier cavity wall insulation installations where we've actually extracted old insulation and refilled that with new insulation to help make sure that it's performing efficiently for our tenants. In terms of grant funding, we've done very well from the HEAPS programme. We've managed to we've drawn in more than £12 million worth of HEAPS money since the programme started, which is very good. And again, that's helped to improve the homes of owner-occupiers and privately rented properties as well, to help coincide with the work that we've been doing to our own stock. Well, certainly with the Warm Homes Fund, we're developing that over this year. That should be completed by the end of this year. And again, that's extending the gas network in a number of areas. We have 352 houses installed in that, 352 houses included in that programme for gas upgrades, and a further, let me see, we have another 60 for air source heat pumps as well. So in terms of monitoring energy efficiency of the stock, I mean, we have our current EISH performance is 80.2%, which is above the Scottish average. We have an energy, an EPC surveyor, an energy performance certificate surveyor, who works within our section. And he's constantly out there renewing EPCs to try and get to keep track of where our performance is with the houses, and make sure that the new things that we're installing is reflected in the energy rating for the house.
Thanks very much for that, John. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, convener. I think this is an excellent paper and an excellent piece of work to highlight how we, important issues and going forward, and find it very encouraging to read it. If I can have two questions, please. The first one is on bungalows. We're chatting about in the report about the type of housing for various needs, and certainly in relation to elderly people or people with disabilities. What kind of information can you give us on the need for bungalows? Because a lot of the housing that's coming forward we don't have as much new bungalows developers seem to be keener to build two-storey or flats rather than bungalows. But is any of the work highlighted a need for bungalows within our new developments that are going forward?
Certainly, some of our new developments, I'm thinking of Blackthorn out at Blair Gowrie. They had, what we would have previously described as pensioners' cottages with, ground floor level access. I tend to think that ground floor level access is more important than necessarily just having the whole of a house on one level. But is there some further response that you can give, Councillor Waters, with regard to that, Claire? And certainly, other new development that we've done. I'm thinking about Glenairn Road, where again we've had ground floor accessible properties, but with flats above them as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, the demand for ground floor level access properties obviously, continues and will be set to continue. In terms of bungalows specifically, I think it's more the needs that the household needs, and that very much is for that ground floor level access. We do have a number of bungalow, or as we used to call them, pensioner bungalow properties within our existing stock that do continue to be very popular. And I certainly think in terms of some of the future planning going forward, and maybe some of the work and the investment that we need to consider as a housing service, is how we make some of those more accessible or continue to be accessible for people that do require those level access types of properties. So we've got some pensioners bungalows, or some bungalows I would say, that have got steep steps going up to them. I know we've got some in one area, which I think, yeah, they're great once you're in the properties or in the surrounding area, they're fine, but perhaps we need to do a bit of work to make the overall accessibility better. So there's a number of areas like that we're definitely considering in terms of our existing stock as well.
And your second question, Councillor Waters?
It's to do with the hoarding. Having been involved in a case where due to learning disabilities, seen excessive hoarding and seen officers in the fire brigade deal with it very well. But is there any thing you can say on the outcome or the success within where we're dealing with hoarding within houses for various reasons? Because it's quite traumatic on the people that are doing it when you're trying to get them to declutter or dehoard, if that's the right word. Is there any feedback you can give on the success of that programme where we're working with other partners to achieve that?
Certainly, anecdotally, the feedback that I've had from the agencies involved and the service is that it is an issue which is handled with absolute sensitivity because of the mental health and the lack of ability of the people who are hoarding to cope. I don't know if we have any detail on the actual numbers of instances where we've supported people to solve their hoarding issues, and whether there's a breakdown between wet and dry hoarding. Claire, that's a big buck pass there, you see.
I don't have the detail in terms of numbers. Michelle might be able to give us an indication. What I would certainly say is that since we've introduced the protocol and we've undertaken fairly intensive and extensive training and awareness raising with our staff, probably a few more cases have come to the fore, so I think we've been in a better position to identify hoarding. Certainly in the past, sort of tenants who don't engage with the service, either through the repairs service or indeed with their local housing officers, we've undertaken an exercise where now, if we've not had contact with a tenant for a couple of years, we will arrange to go out and undertake a visit. So that process has identified one or two additional cases in terms of hoarding. In terms of the successful outcomes, I would say yes, we have been very successful. That really person-centred partnership approach has been absolutely key. I think the staff actually having that understanding of the anxiety that can be created to the individual who's sort of, struggling with hoarding, which is now recognised as a mental health condition. I think their understanding has really enabled them to take that really sensitive approach, and it is a fairly slow, step-by-step, day-by-day almost approach, but we've certainly had some really good success and outcomes on that in that respect. Barbara, did you have something to add to that?
I think we're going to bring Michelle in there. So.
Yeah, certainly in terms of numbers, on average the teams are dealing with between 20 to 25 cases throughout the localities to varying degrees. Some issues around garden hoarding, some issues around that and internal hoarding, animal hoarding. I think it is a very much a person-centred approach we do take. We don't have target timescales for how long it takes our officers to resolve these or how quickly we expect them to resolve it, because sometimes it is a case of, you know, one step forward and a couple back the next time. It's very much based on that individual and working with them. So yes, it is resource intensive, but the outcomes are successful, and I think within the housing contribution statement there's some direct feedback from an individual we have supported through hoarding, because it is quite challenging for both the officer and the member of the community and also the tenant. So we do have positive outcomes. We've got some where, yes, we know absolutely we're in it for the long term, but it's the outcome at the end that we're looking for.
Thanks very much for that, Michelle. Richard, okay. Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Convener. The Executive Director said we weren't getting any younger, us. And I certainly would just reflect that over 12 years as a councillor, the papers that came to the Housing Committee previously, you know, there's items in this now that just weren't features of what we looked at 12 years ago. My question was, and I know that Claire and Michelle came out and did some engagement with Blairgowrie Community Council, Blairgowrie and Rattray Community Council a couple of months ago, which was really, really positive. And it's more about how, you know, this is an excellent report, and all tribute to our officers that take this work forward and the sector leading work that's within it. But the wider buy-in from communities about how they see their future developing and how we as a council respond to those community demands, is that built in terms of the housing service and how we work? I mean, certainly I don't ever recall the health service coming out to engage with the community council in the same way that the council have. And that's hugely important, especially areas thinking about the sort of north and west of Perth where new communities are being built. And how we're developing that for the future. And my second point was going back to the comments Councillor Gray and others have raised about the private sector housing, and again going back to Blairgowrie, but the work that was done with Blackthorn Place, where officers of the council engaged directly with Stuart Milne Homes and actually, you know, developed some quite creative approaches, and how the council and the health service are going to engage with the developers. And I don't think they'll come banging on our door to have that engagement, that maybe we need to go out and do a bit more of that and take communities with us. So quite a lot there, but it's a huge credit to our officers that these papers are so different to those that we used to get when I started out as a councillor 12 years ago. And it's really positive, in that direction of travel is to be welcomed.
I think you're right to point out the flip side of the coin. You know, what we're discussing here today is housing's contribution to better health outcomes. Similarly, there has to be, you know, a health contribution towards better housing outcomes or better community outcomes as the other side of the coin. It's something that I raised with the housing minister when I met him last week, as well as advancing the case for our rapid decision on our rapid rehousing transition plan. And it's also something that I think the Health Minister has given a commitment to. I haven't seen that evidenced across Scotland in terms of a response, but it is something that we will pursue. In terms of community engagement, a lot of it is capacity related, and therefore the priority is with regard to the Council's new build programme and engaging with communities around about the sites that we're wanting to develop. To that end, we've been valuably assisted by CCG, our strategic housing partner, sort of bringing a different skill set and mindset to how we engage with communities. And as Claire said, or in fact I think you said, the work that we'd done with Stuart Milne in Blackthorn as well, just bringing that different channel of approach from the private sector. So I don't know if there's anything that you want to add, Barbara or Claire, to... No.
I thank you for sort of your comments about the quality of the reports. Sort of, and I think that that goes a lot back to actually the quality of the staff that we have in the service. Sort of this is, I think I said it the last time or the time before. Sort of I've been executive director for slightly less than a year now. Sort of, and the commitment within sort of across the whole service, but with the housing colleagues, sort of just takes me by surprise and sort of amazement some days, I have to say. Sort of, I think that, sort of what you're, sort of is a very clear message this morning is about, sort of how we engage, sort of, and not just with our own tenants, sort of, but with, sort of other stakeholders who are experiencing the same issues that our own tenants have. And I think we just need to go back and have a little, sort of discussion about how we go about that. Sort of, and obviously, sort of the development in Blairgowrie is a very, very strong, sort of case study of how listening to communities and taking communities, sort of concerns on board actually leads to a better development in many ways as well, both for the people who are already living there and the new tenants that we want to bring in. I'm also struck by the fact that we had a placemaking workshop, sort of with developers probably about a fortnight ago. And our planners were leading on that, sort of, so I will go back and actually ask, sort of the kinds of discussions that we're having in terms of what new developments look like, particularly given, sort of the fact that, sort of our demographics are changing, not just because of older people, but with more and more people having, sort of complex needs, sort of as well. So we'll take that on board, and at some point that will be coming back.
Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, Convener. Claire, on behalf of the Integration Joint Board, of which I'm a member, can I thank you and your team for the tremendous work that's been put into all aspects of housing in Perth and Kinross. It really is a tremendous effort, and it's obviously key to the health and well-being of our population. I just wanted to ask and to check, if you like. I'm looking here, I don't know if you've seen it here, the revised strategic commissioning plan for the Health and Social Care Partnership, which is at a draft stage that I'm being asked to consider. I notice in its introduction that it says, this is our second 3-year plan, produced in partnership with service users, carers, staff and the third sector. I just wanted to be sure that you have been engaged in this and that you're fully supportive of the direction of travel here.
Claire?
Yes, I certainly have been involved. Colleagues who have been pulling together and leading in terms of pulling together the commissioning plan have obviously been fully aware of and involved in the health and the housing contribution statement. As you know, it went along to the IJB, and I have also attended the executive management team. In some respects, housing contribution statements are sometimes actually an appendix to the strategic plan and a kind of more detailed statement. In our case, ours was actually threaded through the original strategic plan. That is actually recognised as good practice, and that will continue to be the case with the plan. So, I mean, there's still work to be done on it, and I think beefing up potentially some of the housing contribution information that we've got now within this statement probably would be helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, I think demonstrating a fully joined up approach is critical here, and thanks for that.
Thanks for that, Councillor Drysdale. I think the Director would like to comment on that.
Okay. And again, sort of just to give further reassurance, sort of an early draft has been to the Executive Officer team, so there's been input, sort of from all services, sort of an executive level as well in developing that to make sure that, sort of it is a very partnership-based approach.
Are there any other contributions? I'm just kind of conscious of the of time marching on, and I was actually going to forego my comments. But if we want to be quick, Councillor Cole, quick comment, and then Councillor Waters a comment. Anyone else?
Thank you, Convener.
Oh, come on. Councillor McCall. Yes.
My comment kind of leads on from the comment made earlier by Councillor Shires in terms of the papers, but it's really around terminology, because we talk about specialist housing needs, whereas in fact we have an ageing demographic. It's not a bad thing. In fact, I think it's a great thing. And I think that perhaps, and elsewhere in the paper we talk about appropriate housing needs, but sometimes we talk about specialist housing needs. And I think as people lives progress and they live longer, both those with various specialist needs, that's their normal housing, that's their normalised housing, and I think we just need to be careful about the language we use.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you. I think it's been mentioned, the quality of this report is absolutely fantastic, and it does go far beyond just the council's house and stock or anything like that. It is more about our communities, and welcome the comments that you will look at the report and see how we can take this forward and what we do with it. I know, Councillor Barrett, you've mentioned the chats with the Scottish Government about this, but within our scope and our remit, we need to ensure that some of this goes forward toward planning and stuff like that we can have a look at various policies. We have 25% affordable housing. Is there anything that come out of this that can make us do more? It's more than just our housing, the social and economic demographic. This covers the full spectrum, so we need to ensure that everybody can benefit from the insights that are gained from this piece of work.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor McEwen.
Thank you. Another excellent housing report. That's all I can say. And the health and social care aspect of it floats what my interests are as well. Blackthorn Place has to be mentioned by myself. My other ward councillors have mentioned it already. A couple of Saturdays ago, I took the opportunity to actually go around Blackthorn Place on a lovely sunny Saturday morning, knocking the doors, speaking to residents, and kids playing in the streets, people out washing their cars, doing the gardens, neighbours talking to each other, people coming to visit. That is what's happening in Blackthorn Place, and that's down to the mixed tenure that's there. Speaking to people who have the shared equity, they're over the moon. You would think they'd won the lottery by being able to get a property of this quality in this area and actually be able to have it support and financing that. So I think going forward with the mixed tenure idea in these social sites is definitely a very positive thing. And what I would also say is that Blackthorn Place came through a maelstrom of complaints. During our election in 2017, it was one of the most dominant things we had to deal with as councillors during the campaign, even down to planning committee and Councillor Lyle having to do a casting vote to allow the development to be built in the first place. It shows the hurdles and the obstacles that it all had to go through, and I'm very, very pleased to see what we've actually ended up with, and seeing the residents that are there and the difference we make, not just the video that you showed of the family, but individuals that I know in there and other families that I spoke to on that Saturday morning. So it's just a great example of the great work and how brave you were to make these different decisions about housing types than you'd done before.
Thanks very much for that, Tom. I'm really grateful for that comment. I think when I became housing convener again at the start of this term, this was one of the big hot potatoes on that landed on my desk, and I was determined that given that we'd missed out on affordable housing developments through all the other phases in that area, that we weren't going to do that here. And the officers have to be commended for fronting up and for engaging with the communities in such a positive and constructive manner. So. I think the only thing that we haven't touched on to the degree that I might have liked in the discussion so far, I think, is the importance of technology enabled care, and I think Claire also touched on the level of adaptations that have been carried out in the area, with 800 major adaptations, 1,500 minor adaptations. So I'll forgo my further comments on this report. I'm conscious that lunch has been served prompt at 12 o'clock and that other people might have E&I to go to at 1. So I would like us to take the final report at a canter if we can agree to this report. Agreed? Thank you. So, Paper 7 puts before members the new allocations policy developed in conjunction with Caledonia Housing and Hillcrest Housing. It covers 10,000 social rented homes in our area and more than 90% of the local social rented sector. I've been at pains to express the importance of the Common Housing Register to supporting our Home First Rapid Rehousing programme. Other local authorities would give their eye teeth to have the depth of collaboration and integration and nomination rights that we enjoy with our partners Caledonia and Hillcrest, which delivers better outcomes in rapid rehousing for people suffering from or afflicted by homelessness in our area. You can see the reduction in numbers of people on the waiting list, the dramatic reduction in the number of homeless people on the waiting list, and the shortening of homeless case closure times by almost 60% over 3 years, as well as the increasing number of lets to homeless people, people with medical priority and other strategic needs. The revised policy is still based on a groups and points system, but has been tweaked slightly. The changes are summarised in Appendix 1. These take account of greater security of the private rented housing sector, greater emphasis on relationship breakdown, priorities to families and victims of domestic abuse to remove the perpetrator of abuse from the home more quickly, which is considered good practice nationally and is also consistent with the pledges that we made to better support women victims of domestic abuse when we signed the Make a Stand pledge last year. I mentioned earlier that we proposed to make a small change in how we consider overcrowding, and will prioritise the largest overcrowded households where 2 households have the same number of points before considering the length of time or date of the applications. And this means that more people's housing needs will be addressed in the new policy. Delayed hospital discharge cases will be specifically included as one of our strategic housing needs categories, so that the allocations policy formally reflects adopted practice and the contribution housing makes to achieving better health outcomes for people to minimise delayed discharge and help maintain people's independence and independent living skills rather than have these eroded through unnecessary hospital stays is minimised. Are there any questions on the report? Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener. I do have other questions, but I'll leave them as comments till the end. I do have one question actually on page 140 on the Group Plus point system in terms of allocation of medical need. I'm a bit unclear as to how, as I understand it, perhaps you can clarify this for me, medical need is usually confirmed by approaching an applicant's GP for information, but some of the information is really about the existing housing provision, and as far as I'm aware, the GPs don't necessarily visit those and can't make an assessment on it. So I'm not quite sure how those two parts join up, so maybe you could clarify that for me.
I think medical points are most generally assessed through a self-assessment questionnaire, which is then considered by an independent medical examiner. But Claire can probably clarify exactly where the GPs fit in, or... Sorry. Elaine can.
You've just answered the question. It's through a self-assessment. We really get feedback from a GP. We've got a medical advisory service which is set up through health that we consult with regarding the person's medical circumstances, and they might contact the GP if it's required, but it's really based on GP information. The applicant would fill out a self-assessment. We would liaise with their medical advisory service, and based on that would reward them priority under medical.
Okay, thank you for that. I just know my personal experience has not been to that extent around quality of life, but in the interest of brevity, I'll maybe take this off online if everybody else is okay with that, and perhaps we can come back with fuller information the next time this report comes back.
Okay, and happy to liaise with you on that. So, Councillor McEwen.
Hello, in page 120 of our documents, is removal of applications 9.1. I'm not sure we need to, or whether we could reword the statement that says that your application is removed from the system when you die. I think we could probably do that in a cleverer way than what we're currently doing.
Do you want to comment on that? I saw Claire nodding, so...
We will look at that, I think, fair point in terms of the sensitivity around and about the wording.
And I think there would be sensitivities as to whether you had an application but you had a partner or something, and whether they should be considered to inherit the application and its original dates, etc. So,
The other question I have quickly is that the report talks about you losing your status if you make yourself homeless. There obviously are circumstances where people who are in private accommodation have to sell their property for financial reasons, therefore making themselves homeless. But that doesn't seem to come as an example. We seem to talk about people currently in the system giving up a property and making themselves homeless. How does that affect the points system? So you have somebody in a private home who's having to sell their property for the financial need, then want to go into social housing as their housing option afterwards. I couldn't see how that type of example fitted into.
Claire, I don't know whether that, or whether Elaine wants to comment on, whether intentionality of homeless comes into that, or whether things like mortgage to rent schemes would be, a means of deflecting any potential homelessness situation from that. Elaine, do you want to comment, or can you comment on that?
So your example of somebody who lives in the private sector can no longer afford it and presents as home, we would undertake an assessment to establish whether or not it was reasonable for them to continue to reside on there under financial circumstances. So they might not be intentionally homeless. So again, it's about the person coming in. It's very person-centred. It's based on their current circumstances. But if they gave up a property knowing that giving up that is a secure property, and they could provided they did have the financial means to pay for it, they would be classed as intentionally homeless. But it's about looking at their circumstances, doing a financial assessment with them, and look at what the reason why they can't continue to reside in that property. So it's not quite clear cut as you've described it. It's based on quite a lot of other circumstances within the individual.
Okay. Are there any other comments? Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener. These are more comments and questions. Again, it's to do with terminology and how papers are presented. On pages 94 and 95, we have, for example, priority to people in most need of housing. We have 3 categories. In fact, we have a number of categories all described slightly differently. And I think then on section 2.2, we have a breakdown of how these the waiting lists are constructed, but they're different from the lets. So I think for consistency and for us elected members who are not as familiar with the housing terminology as you all might be, it would be helpful if there was some consistency in the way these things are described, so that there's at least a read across and we can see what they mean. Thank you.
I think officers can take that point on board. I have to confess I didn't follow it myself, but no.
If we're going to use terminology and categorisations of applicants, then we should use the same categorisation and the same terminology when we talk about how we've let our properties. At the moment, they're different. The descriptions are different. Okay. So it's not clear to do the read across.
Thank you. I don't know, but I think the officers will take it on board, Councillor McCall. Can we agree to the report? Thank you very much. Thank you for your attendance and your scrutiny and your questions today.